Hello and welcome to the sixth episode of Ace Parenting Together, authentic, connected, and empathic. My name is Babak Saraje, and I am here with my co-host Melissa LaPlante. We'll bring you fresh perspectives and ideas about best parenting practices along with time-tested communication skills to use in real-life situations to help you and your children be your authentic selves, build empathic connections, and thrive in your relationships. And today we are going to talk about recovering and repairing mistakes. Of course, mistakes are very common, and humans make mistakes, children make mistakes, parents make mistakes, and I think it's very important to talk about what to do and sort of how to respond to these situations where we make mistakes. Don't you agree, Melissa?
Absolutely. This is one of my favorite topics because I love being able to actually talk about the fact that making mistakes is something we actually want to do because just that shows our kids, our authentic selves and our humanness, and how we respond to it is going to show them how they need to be responding to their own mistakes. So,
Indeed. And I think this is really important because a common reaction, of course, to mistakes is, I messed that up and sort of, have this critical response and so on. And I think I have some of that. And I think some of it actually has to do with how I was treated as a kid when I was making mistakes. And I think this is really important as parents to also talk about because how we respond to our children's mistakes and our own mistakes sort of models that behavior for them. And, once they grow up, they may end up sort of in that same situation.
absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. And so, that sort of internalization of responses to mistakes and sort of automatic responses to mistakes is really important. And also, I think, focusing on sort of the mistakes and, whatever the consequences or this, the results of that mistake, those mistakes are in the moment, creates a lot of pressure, right? So to do the right thing, and sort of perversely, this pressure itself can increase the number of mistakes that people make because you're sort of acting or behaving or trying to decide under pressure and trying to do the right thing, but then you end up doing the wrong thing, and making things worse.
Absolutely. And I'm listening to you. And when I sort of think about myself and when I make mistakes, you mentioned, that sort of makes you kind of jump into self-criticism and, I know better than this and, come on, I can do this. But it's so important that we give ourselves grace, and feel empowered by mistakes because we can then go back and adjust and fix, and then talk openly about the mistakes we made with our children and make a connection rather than disconnecting with a sense of perfectionism.
That's right. That's right.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's really important, I think. And focusing on the mistakes and sort of wanting to have perfect response, it really also incentivizes doing the easier things. Where that you're not going to make a mistake. It's actually kind of funny because I you use Duolingo at all for languages.
Yeah, it's funny. I do not, but my husband uses Duolingo because I grew up speaking Spanish and my father
Yeah.
is from Cuba. And so he is always trying hard to learn as much Spanish as he
Right.
can.
Yeah.
And so
Right.
very familiar with Duolingo.
Yeah,
Yes.
and I love learning languages, and so I've been using it. I started using it some years ago, and then I stopped, and I started using it again this summer, among other things, to learn some more Spanish and so on. Um, but there's this very, in some ways, it's very motivating. It has like points and leagues and all of that, and there's this feature where you can double up your points, for 15 minutes.
Right.
And adds this pressure. I want to double up my points. So
Yes.
if a lesson takes 5 minutes to complete, then that's not very good because I will just get 30 points. and
Right.
I go and do the easy lessons that I know
Yeah.
I can do in 1 minute to get
Competing
those.
against yourself.
Exactly. And this is the
Mhm.
same thing because there's pressure, right? There's some time pressure there. And this is the same thing with mistakes. I think
Sure.
if, if we put a lot of pressure to do the right thing all the time, that really incentivizes doing the easier stuff where, we know that we're not making mistakes. And so, of course, this blocks growth and creativity and so on.
Sure.
So yeah, so it's really important to move away from that, pressure and normalize making mistakes. But how do we do that?
Hmm. That is very difficult because again, every part of parent effectiveness training and being an effective parent requires that self-disclosure component, and s- getting comfortable with your yourself and who you are and what makes you who you are. And I think for a lot of people, it's difficult to get comfortable with self-disclosure with their children because that's goes against the grain. We're not supposed to be doing that. Our kids look at us, we're their
Right.
example. Well, yeah, we are their example, and there is no perfect. um,
Mhm. Mhm.
and so we just have to um, send the message of getting comfortable being perfectly imperfect.
Mhm. That's right. Yeah. So we all have these human qualities. Part of it is making mistakes. In fact, that's how we learn, right? If everything I did was, never encountered any mistakes, that either means that I have no capacity to learn or I'm not human.
Right.
I can't even imagine what that might be like.
Absolutely.
That's right. So yeah, this is really sort of exemplified in the skills and the philosophy of parent effectiveness training. So for one thing, for example, all of these sort of elements of effective communication that we have talked about before, active listening and iMessages and self-disclosure, as you just said, and these basically place children and parents alike sort of on a sort of an equal position to collaborate and
Mhm.
solve problems together, um, address their needs and meet their needs and so on. And really for them to be their authentic self, right? And this is a big part of normalizing mistakes, and learning from them and allowing them to happen in the first place.
Absolutely. And that sort of ties into as parents, we don't want to prevent our kids from making mistakes, for the very same reason. You can't protect them from um, every single possible mistake. You'll drive yourself crazy. And for
Yeah,
the very same reason that you want to be yourself, comfortable and okay with making a mistake and being real and honest about how you disclose and talk to your kid about that, and then also allowing them to feel comfortable when they make a mistake rather
that's
than
right.
judging and punishing, for sure.
Exactly. That's right. Yeah. And not only we will drive ourselves crazy if we really try to be a sort of a perfect, impossibly perfect parent, we would also really inhibit growth of the children. I mean, just thinking about, say, a baby who's just starting to learn to walk or move around and so on. Of course, they're going to fall, right? And that's basically like, okay, I took the wrong step or I didn't balance myself very well and I fell. But that is how we learn by feedback and by
Yep.
by repeating and allowing that space for practice.
Sure.
So maybe we'll come to some real life examples,
Yeah.
some situations where, especially as parents, where we might have made a mistake and how to recover and repair that mistake with our children.
Yeah. Yeah, you and I, when we were talking earlier, I said I think I could come up with 5,000 because I definitely embrace the mistakes that I make, and it makes
Right.
me feel proud, um, when I do allow myself to make the mistake and own it, and talk about it out loud, and it was my bad. I stand corrected, because I
Mhm.
want my family to know that they too can feel the same way about their mistakes. It's a
Right.
human quality. I think I mentioned in one of the earlier episodes the story of my daughter who was trying to, for lack of better words, steal the treasure box toy from her
Yeah, I
classmate,
remember that. Mhm.
and so my gut reaction was just, I was mortified when the teacher called me to tell me that, and so I jumped right into like punishment and what can I do so she never does this again. And so I made her write 100 times, I will not steal.
Yeah.
And so, um, she cried the whole time she was doing it. And we talked about, how, yeah, she didn't do that again, but the punishment worked in a sense, but not for the right reasons.
Mhm. Mhm.
And so when I had a chance to walk away from that, I really, even in the moment, it just didn't feel right.
Mhm.
I walked away from that feeling like I I am not proud of that parenting moment. I'm human. It happened. I'm going to own it. But later, I was able to, after we had both settled down and before she was going to bed, we sat on her bed and talked through it. And I came in with an apology, telling her that I don't like how I responded to today, and what you did at school, and I didn't even give you a chance to talk or let me hear your side of it, and I'd like a redo. And my kids know I say that a lot. Can we have a redo? And then I was able to let her actively I'm sorry, I was able to actively listen while she, told me everything from her perspective, and allowing her to do that then, cleared the emotional flooding so that she could critically think,
Yeah.
and she felt comfortable because I was telling her that that's not how I want to respond to something like that. And she was even able to come up with her own problem solving skills in that moment, saying, well, in hindsight, now that I'm thinking about it, it'll be my turn to the treasure box and I can just pick the same thing. Well, yeah, because she could critically think, right?
Right.
And I gave her that opportunity.
Right.
And I rebounded from a mistake, and it's okay.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that, the process you just described is really important because, lots of times, for whatever reason this happens, if I yell at my child or, do something that I know that I don't want to do, it's not really how I want to interact with my child. Um, I need some time to actually recover and repair in myself, right? So to understand, okay, well, this wasn't really the best response. Um, and sort of get in touch with myself and see where, what went wrong, right? And
Yeah.
then go back and repair that with the child.
Hmm.
And, for me, for example, lots of times, an example that comes to my mind is when I am talking, to my child. This also kind of happens with other people, but especially with children, they're really good at sort of pulling this trigger that I have, perhaps because of all sorts of experiences in my own childhood.
Hmm.
For
Hmm.
example, if I'm talking to them and I'm trying to tell them something that maybe I'm finding problematic or I want to talk to them about, and they don't want to talk, right? So they're not in a position. They make it very clear. No, I don't want to talk about this right now, and then like they start to walk away. And this really like this was going on for a while when it really triggered me, and I thought, no, you're going to stay here and listen to me because I have something to talk about.
Yeah.
Like it just felt wrong also because I'm forcing myself basically and not backing off because they're not ready to talk, right?
Right.
um, and it just created this sort of very tense situation. And so
Sure.
what I needed to do was to sort of reflect on where is this coming from and why am I getting so triggered. And I realized that it perhaps had something to do with how I wasn't listened to when I was a child in
Mhm.
all sorts of environments I was at, school, home, but other people in positions of power. And once I realized that I can also pause in that moment and say, oh, okay, I see you don't want to be a part of this. I am having a problem, so I would like to have a time later on, if we can, to talk about this, right? So I
Absolutely.
back off and I say, can we talk about this some other time?
Yep.
And, you know, frequently they would say, yeah, we can talk about it later. Maybe they're not ready to say when right now. We can come back to it later.
Mhm.
And and go forward. But the way that I could say that and come back and repair that with them was to say, I know that I have been doing this, and this is something that is not, is not on you. This is something that gets really triggered in me. Maybe because of this, I want to do better, and so I'm going to take a pause and let you, walk away if you don't want to talk, and so that I'm
Absolutely.
not forcing myself
Yeah.
on
Yeah.
you. Yeah.
I am, this is literally triggering something that I didn't remember when we were talking earlier.
Mhm.
But I have a similar situation with the same feeling. And maybe not, something stemming from childhood, but like a little bit of offended, like, but I'm just being so concerned,
Mhm.
The other day, my son was on the couch and I don't know if he remembered something he forgot or something. And he's like, oh, and I said, sweetheart, are you okay? What's the matter? I don't want to talk about it. Can you just leave me alone? And he walked away and he went into his room, and whatever it was that he had to manage, that was not my problem. But
Yeah.
I was like, and he didn't, his intention was not to hurt my feelings, but
Yeah.
I sometimes I take it that way. Like, why wouldn't you want me to help you through this? Or because my feelings get hurt, but yet, like you said, I waited a few minutes and I said, okay, this is on me. That's my interpretation of it. And sure enough, a half an hour later, he walked out as though nothing had happened. And he was like, what are we having for dinner tonight? Did I hear you say steak? And it was
Right.
like nothing had happened. So, again, that's on me.
Right. That's
That
right.
was my interpretation. And he just needed a minute, and he was going to solve his own problem. So,
That's right. That's
yeah.
right. Yeah. So yeah. So you took that moment. And you didn't let it, the trigger or whatever it was that was activated in you
Yeah.
to take over, right? Yeah. And so,
Sure.
this is also, so this is sort of modeling how to deal with mistakes and
Yeah.
repair whatever is happening. And I think it's also important how we really deal with, situations where some of the stuff is not everything is under our control. Like, for example, my kids go to school and they have, they have to have homework by a certain deadline, and if not, they're gonna, that's gonna be reflected in the report cards and so on.
Sure.
So how we deal with stuff like that is also important. So, for example, one thing that I have tried to do is, like growing up, I was, really wanted to get the best grades and like be on time and like really placed a lot of importance on my own grades and so on.
Yeah.
But I realized afterwards that this is really not right. Yes, these grades actually helped me and like they were important in my education and path to profession and so on. But placing those pressures on my own kids is not really healthy or helpful to them.
Right.
So, if I check their report card and I see that there's missing assignment and things like that, the thing that I'm going to focus on is not the grade. And because there's so much focus on grade at school anyway, they are kind of thinking about it and say, okay, well, I will get an A, I promise. And I'm like, it's not, I understand. Okay. So if you care about it, that's fine. But that's not my focus. And what I'm trying to see is if you're having a bad experience in this class, is there something missing or, is something else preventing you from doing your work so that we can,
Sure.
help you do what you actually really want to do.
Right.
And I think that, backing off and taking the pressure off and helping the child to sort of address their own situation and ask for help if they need to, that is really important in dealing with this
Sure.
sorts of
Yeah,
things.
I agree.
Yeah, and you were telling me something about online school, I think, that the experience that you had during COVID.
Yeah, yeah, that's relating to my son. When we were really in the thick of COVID in the beginning, when school went virtual for what felt like a gazillion years, um, it was such a stressful time, and
Mhm. Yeah,
it was
for all.
very. I talk about triggers. Every time I think
Yeah,
about it, I go back into the panic of, oh my goodness. But, as a parent, it was so hard to be working, and then also managing your kids being online with school.
yeah,
And my husband and I noticed pretty quickly into it that Matthew is just not a virtual learner. That's
right.
just not where he learns best. He is a people person. He
Mhm. Mhm.
thrives on being surrounded by people. And so when school was virtual, he just was not connecting with the teachers. And so I was trying to get him to be around people. So I brought him to my office with me, and then he was doing school there. And at least there was, he wasn't home alone with, no stimulation.
Right.
But then what was happening is I was getting text messages left and right at work. Can you go check on Matthew? He excused himself at the bathroom, but he's been gone for a lot longer than a bathroom. And so this particular day I had been texted, messaged by the teachers. I mean, maybe 5, 8 times. And
Right.
so we got in the car to go home, and it was an exhausting day. And then that just was like the last straw, and I just lost
Yeah.
it on him. And I am not a screamer, but I am doing everything in my power to help you. Do you think this is easy for me? I mean, I was really was like I was possessed. And I think obviously the emotions of being in the middle of COVID, and nobody was no at this point we didn't know what was happening and how long was this going to be, and so my emotions played into it, and his eyes just watered, and he was fighting back the tears, and he was silent. And it was another situation where I said
Yeah.
later on that evening, when we had got home, we ate and just had some time to chill, and I went in to him before he went to sleep, and I apologize. In particular, I do not like yelling. I don't
Yeah.
like that feeling. I don't like to be yelled at, and so I don't want to be yelling at someone else. And um, you know, I admitted that my emotions are really, really high. It's stressful at work trying to see patients in the middle of COVID. And, I'm trying to talk to the teachers, and I'm trying to make this work for everybody. And, it allowed me to disclose my raw emotions with him,
Mhm.
but
Mhm.
mostly apologize for how I handled my emotions.
Right.
And that's how we worked through it. Then it was on him to problem solve how, and we can't change the fact that right now school is virtual, so
Right.
we've got to come up with, not we, I can certainly brainstorm with you, but only some techniques that you just almost got to push through. Nobody loves this, so we
Mhm.
just got to get through it. But
Mhm.
definitely had to work my way back from that mistake.
Yeah. And, recovering from that mistake and repairing that relationship, that's really important, right? Especially during those, really intense times, and,
For
all of
sure.
the difficulty and uncertainty
Yeah.
and all of that, and isolation. And that is what will pull people through, right? That
Yeah.
connection. All right. Well, I think that's a good place to stop for today. Well, and thank you all for listening to this episode of ACE Parenting Together, authentic, connected, and empathic. We're working to bring you content on best parenting practices that's worth your time and adds not to the noise, but to the signal. Let us know what you want to hear on this podcast. All questions about parenting and thinking through real life situations are welcome. See you next time.
See you next time.